Emotional exposures. Why most people collapse first. Pressure doesn't break people, their reactions do. Most situations that feel overwhelming are not inherently destructive, they are simply intense. Yet intensity alone does not cause collapse. What causes collapse is the meaning assigned to that intensity, the interpretation, the internal narrative, the sudden surge of emotion that turns discomfort into threat. When something goes wrong, most people don't pause, they react. Their voice tightens, their breathing shortens, their thoughts accelerate. The nervous system switches into urgency mode. In that moment, they are no longer responding to reality, they are responding to perception. And perception, when fueled by unchecked emotion, exaggerates everything. What most people miss is that emotional breakdown starts internally long before it becomes visible externally. Long before someone raises their voice or shuts down or panics, something subtle has already happened. A thought has been accepted without question. A fear has been believed without examination. A sensation has been interpreted as danger instead of discomfort. The body responds instantly, heart rate increases, muscles tighten, vision narrows, and the mind begins searching for relief. This is where collapse begins. Not because the situation is unbearable, but because the mind has decided it is unbearable. There is a psychological tension hidden inside pressure. Most individuals confuse stress with danger. Stress is simply demand placed on the system. Danger is threat to survival. The body does not always distinguish between the two. If awareness is absent, stress is interpreted as threat, and the nervous system responds as if survival is at stake. This is why people overreact to criticism, why they panic under deadlines, why they escalate minor conflicts. Their system has not been trained to differentiate intensity from threat. Without training, the body assumes the worst. Calm individuals understand something crucial. Panic is a learned response, not an inevitable one. It is the result of repetition. If someone has repeatedly responded to stress with urgency, their system becomes conditioned to escalate quickly. But conditioning can be reversed. Emotional stability is trainable. The first step is recognizing that discomfort does not require immediate movement. The mind often seeks action as relief. It wants to fix, argue, explain, escape, or control. But action taken under emotional escalation is rarely precise. It is reactive. It is fueled by impulse rather than clarity. Strong minds interrupt this cycle. They notice the first surge, they feel the tightening, they observe the racing thought, and instead of moving with it, they slow down. This pause changes everything. In that pause, awareness enters. Awareness allows the individual to question the narrative forming in their mind. Is this actually a threat? Is this truly urgent? Or is my system simply reacting out of habit? This is where emotional exposure becomes visible. Most people are not overwhelmed by reality. They are overwhelmed by interpretation. The story they tell themselves amplifies the situation. A mistake becomes catastrophe. A disagreement becomes rejection. A delay becomes failure. But calm individuals reinterpret. They see pressure as information. They see conflict as data. They see intensity as temporary. This shift reduces emotional amplification. When amplification decreases, control increases. There is also a social component to collapse. Emotional contagion is real. When others panic, the atmosphere thickens. Voices rise. Movements become frantic. Energy spreads. Many individuals unconsciously mirror this escalation. Their nervous system syncs with the loudest emotional signal in the room. Without awareness, you absorb chaos. With awareness, you observe it. This is a defining difference. Remaining calm while others break does not mean you are unaffected. It means you refuse to synchronize with emotional disorder. You let others escalate without joining them. You let the room rise in intensity while you remain grounded. This grounding creates contrast. Contrast creates authority. The calmest person in a chaotic moment automatically becomes the reference point. Others may not admit it, but they orient themselves towards stability. Humans instinctively look for regulation in moments of distress. The one who breathes slower influences the one who breathes faster. This is subtle power. Not dominance. Not control over others. Control over self. To reach this state, the mindset must shift emergency to awareness. Instead of asking, "How do I stop this feeling?" you ask, "What is this feeling teaching me?" Instead of reacting to pressure, you study it. You become curious about your own responses. Curiosity dissolves panic. When you observe your emotional reaction rather than becoming it, distance forms. That distance prevents collapse. It allows you to choose response instead of surrendering to reflex. Over time, this practice reshapes identity. You stop seeing yourself as someone who gets overwhelmed. You become someone who processes internally before acting externally. You become someone who does not amplify chaos. You begin trusting your ability to remain steady. This trust stabilizes your presence. And once stability becomes part of your identity, pressure no longer feels like an attack. It feels like a test. Not a test of survival, but a test of awareness. Most people collapse because they believe the moment is bigger than they are. Calm individuals remain composed because they understand the moment is temporary, but their control is permanent. When others break, it is not because they are weak. It is because they have not learned to regulate interpretation. They allow thought to accelerate unchecked. They allow emotion to escalate unobserved. They allow urgency to dictate behavior. You choose differently. You allow intensity without surrendering to it. You remain steady when others become unstable. You interpret pressure without dramatizing it. You understand that chaos outside does not require chaos inside. And that is where true psychological strength begins to form, not in the absence of pressure, but in the disciplined refusal to let pressure define your internal state. Psychological stillness. Calm becomes invisible powered. The calmest person controls the emotional direction of the room. This is not a motivational idea, it is a psychological reality. In any environment, conflict, pressure, uncertainty, people unconsciously scan for stability. They don't look for the loudest voice. They look for the most regulated nervous system. Most don't realize they are doing this. They simply feel drawn toward whoever appears steady. Emotional energy is contagious. When someone enters a space carrying agitation, others feel it. When someone arrives grounded and quiet, the atmosphere shifts, nervous systems synchronize, breathing patterns mirror, tone changes. This is biological before it is social. What most people miss is this unseen social pattern. Humans instinctively mirror emotional stability. The person who feels safest internally becomes the emotion anchor for everyone else. This is where invisible power begins. Not through dominance, not through assertion, through regulation. Most people try to manage situations externally. They raise their voice, they explain harder, they rush to fix outcomes. But psychological stillness works differently. It doesn't push energy outward, it pulls it inward. You don't absorb chaos, you project steadiness. That projection reshapes the environment. Human behavior responds to presence before it responds to words. Someone can speak calmly, but if their body is tense, others feel the tension. Someone can say they are fine, but if their breathing is shallow, the room knows otherwise. Emotional signals travel faster than language. Regulated presence creates authority without effort. This is the leverage point. When you remain composed under pressure, others instinctively defer. Not consciously. They don't think, this person is powerful. They feel it. Their body responds. Their attention shifts. Their urgency softens. You become the reference point. And you didn't have to do anything. Psychological stillness is not passive. It is active containment. You are holding your emotional state steady while everything else moves. That containment creates gravity. Gravity draws attention. Attention increases perceived importance. This is why calm individuals feel influential. Not because they try to influence. Because they don't leak energy. Most people leak emotion constantly. Through facial expressions. Through rushed speech. Through nervous gestures. Through defensive tone. They reveal uncertainty without realizing it. And uncertainty invites challenge. Stillness closes that door. When you stop reacting emotionally, people stop probing. When you stop absorbing tension, others release it. When you don't escalate, escalation collapses. This changes your mindset. Instead of trying to control situations, you focus on controlling your internal state. Instead of matching intensity, you lower it. Instead of meeting chaos with urgency, you meet it with silence. Silence is uncomfortable for those who are emotionally unsettled. They begin talking more. They start explaining themselves. They fill space with noise. Meanwhile, you remain grounded. That contrast is powerful. Your calm forces reflection. Others become aware of their own agitation in your presence. They slow down. They adjust. They recalibrate. This is emotional leadership. Not leadership by command, leadership by regulation. You also begin noticing how often emotional chaos creates false urgency. People rush decisions. They dramatize problems. They exaggerate consequences. But when you remain psychologically still, you see more clearly. You separate signal from noise. You don't confuse pressure with danger. You don't confuse intensity with importance. You don't confuse emotion with truth. This clarity becomes your advantage. You respond deliberately instead of reflexively. You speak when it matters. You pause when it doesn't. Over time, this reshapes your identity. You stop being pulled into emotional storms. You stop mirroring other people's instability. You become someone who remains centered regardless of environment. This makes you emotionally independent. You don't borrow mood from others. You don't inherit anxiety from rooms. You don't let external chaos dictate internal rhythm. That independence is felt. People treat you differently when they sense this. Conversations become more respectful. Conflicts become less aggressive. Others become more careful with how they approach you. Not because you intimidate, because you don't react. Reaction invites engagement. Stillness ends it. You also become harder to manipulate. Emotional manipulation relies on triggering reactions. When those reactions don't come, the strategy collapses. Provocation loses power. Pressure loses urgency. You are no longer emotionally accessible on demand. This is not coldness, it is discipline. Psychological stillness also deepens awareness. Without emotional turbulence, perception sharpens. You notice micro-expressions. You sense shifts in energy. You hear what people avoid saying. You read between lines. This makes your responses precise. You don't waste energy on unnecessary explanations. You don't defend yourself emotionally. You let behavior speak. People begin projecting strength onto your quiet. They assume confidence. They assume control. They assume depth. And whether they realize it or not, their behavior adjusts accordingly. You become someone whose composure commands respect. Not through force, through presence. Eventually, you realize something subtle. Calm is not the absence of emotion. It is mastery over it. You still feel pressure. You still experience tension. But those sensations no longer dictate movement. You feel them. You observe them. You remain steady. This is the shift. You stop absorbing chaos. You start becoming the calm within it. And once psychological stillness becomes part of who you are, every room changes when you enter it, because your regulated presence quietly reorganizes the emotional landscape around you. Internal discipline. Training yourself not to react. Every trigger asks a single question. Will emotion lead, or will awareness lead? Most people don't notice this question because they answer it automatically. A sharp comment appears. A delay happens. Someone ignores them. Instantly, the body reacts. Thoughts accelerate. The chest tightens. Words rise to the tongue. Without pause, behavior follows. This is reaction. Reaction feels natural, but it is learned. Over years of responding impulsively to discomfort, the nervous system becomes conditioned to move quickly. It seeks relief through expression. It wants to discharge tension immediately. That discharge becomes habit. Internal discipline begins when you interrupt that habit. You notice the sensation. You recognize the impulse. You choose stillness. This is not suppression. It is regulation. You allow the feeling to exist without turning it into action. You stay present with discomfort instead of escaping it through reaction. Most people have never practiced this. They believe emotional control means hiding emotion. But true control means feeling fully while acting selectively. You don't deny anger. You don't avoid frustration. You don't pretend disappointment isn't there. You acknowledge it internally and refuse to let it decide your behavior. That refusal is strength. Every time you pause instead of reacting, your nervous system learns something new. It learns that discomfort is survivable. It learns that silence is safe. It learns that urgency is optional. Over time, these small pauses rewire your emotional response patterns. Restraint rewires the nervous system. This is the curiosity most people miss. Emotional discipline is not a personality trait. It is a trained capacity. Calm individuals were not born regulated. They practiced regulation until it became automatic. This changes how you experience conflict. Instead of escalating emotionally, you observe. Instead of defending immediately, you breathe. Instead of explaining, you wait. That waiting creates space. In that space, clarity emerges. Without emotional rush, your thinking becomes sharper. You see situations more objectively. You notice who is projecting. You sense where power dynamics are shifting. You recognize when silence is more strategic than speech. Mental boundaries form here. You separate impulse from action. You stop letting feelings decide movement. You stop giving reactions freely. These boundaries protect your dignity. They prevent emotional leakage. They keep your energy contained. Contained energy feels powerful. People sense when you are not easily shaken. You become harder to provoke, harder to manipulate, harder to emotionally corner. Because emotional leverage only works on those who react. When you stop reacting, leverage disappears. This is psychological transformation. You move from reactive to regulated, from emotionally driven to internally governed, from impulsive to intentional. Your presence changes. You don't rush conversations. You don't interrupt silence. You don't chase resolution. You allow things to unfold. People notice. They become more careful with their words. They explain themselves more. They reveal their intentions. Meanwhile, you remain steady. Your restraint becomes a mirror. Others see themselves in your calm. Some become uncomfortable. Some become respectful. But all become aware. Internal discipline also changes how you deal with disrespect. Instead of reacting emotionally, you adjust access. You don't argue. You don't defend. You simply remove availability. Boundaries become behavior, not explanation. This is quiet power. You also stop needing to be right. The urge to correct fades. You realize that being understood is less important than being aligned. You allow misunderstandings to exist temporarily. You trust time more than argument. This strengthens identity. You stop seeing yourself as someone who must respond. You become someone who chooses when to engage. You stop outsourcing emotional stability. You become self-governed. Emotional control principle becomes clear. Feel without reacting. Let sensation pass through awareness. Allow emotion to rise and fall without becoming behavior. This is not passive. It requires presence. It requires discipline. But the reward is freedom. You are no longer controlled by triggers. You are no longer pulled into unnecessary conflict. You are no longer emotionally available to chaos. Your inner world stabilizes. That stability extends outward. People treat you differently when they sense this. Conversations slow down. Energy shifts. You don't have to assert dominance. Your composure communicates strength. You also gain clarity in decision making. Without emotional turbulence, you evaluate situations more accurately. You don't make choices from frustration. You don't act from insecurity. You respond from awareness. This gives you advantage. While others are emotionally reactive, you are observant. While others are rushing, you are grounded. While others are seeking relief, you are maintaining alignment. Over time, this becomes your default state. You don't force calm. You embody it. You don't suppress emotion. You regulate it. You don't avoid discomfort. You integrate it. And as internal discipline strengthens, emotional storms lose their power over you. You remain centered while others unravel. You stay present while others scatter. You move deliberately while others react. That is when emotional control stops being something you practice and becomes something you are. Because awareness now leads where impulse once ruled, and restraint has replaced reactivity as your natural state. Quiet mastery, remaining centered while others fall apart. Imagine reaching a point where emotional chaos no longer reaches you, not because life becomes easier, but because you become stronger internally. Situations still unfold, people still react, pressure still appears, but it no longer pulls you into its rhythm. You move through intensity without absorbing it. You observe disturbance without becoming disturbed. This is quiet mastery. Most people think calm is something you feel. In reality, calm is something you become. It is built through repetition, awareness, and restraint. It forms slowly, beneath the surface, through hundreds of moments where you chose not to react, not to explain, not to escalate. Quiet mastery begins when you stop needing emotional resolution. You stop chasing closure. You stop requiring agreement. You stop demanding understanding. Instead, you allow things to exist without interference. This creates inner authority, not authority over others, authority over your internal state. You realize that emotional reactions are invitations. Every insult invites defense. Every misunderstanding invites explanation. Every delay invites frustration. But invitations do not require acceptance. You learn to let them pass. This is where long-term power emerges. Power is not found in controlling situations. It is found in refusing to be controlled by them. When you stop reacting, people lose access to your emotional center. They can no longer provoke you easily. They can no longer influence you through pressure. They can no longer destabilize you with uncertainty. Your nervous system remains steady. That steadiness becomes visible. People feel it before they understand it. They sense that you are not easily moved. They recognize that you don't rush emotionally. They notice that you don't explain yourself. They realize that your presence does not fluctuate with their behavior. This changes how they interact with you. Conversations become more measured. Disrespect decreases. Others become more careful with words. Not because you intimidate, because you don't react. Reaction gives others leverage. Stillness removes it. Quiet mastery also changes how you see the world. You stop interpreting events emotionally. You begin reading them strategically. You observe patterns instead of getting caught in feelings, and study behavior instead of internalizing it. Detachment turns chaos into information. You stop asking why something happened to you. You start asking what it reveals. This gives you clarity. Without emotional noise, perception sharpens. You notice who seeks control. You recognize who feeds on reaction. You identify who respects boundaries. You see where energy flows. This awareness protects you. You no longer waste attention on emotional games. You no longer engage in power struggles. You no longer defend your value. You embody it. Your actions become quiet statements. Your silence becomes communication. Your restraint becomes identity. You stop explaining your direction. You walk it. You stop justifying your boundaries. You live them. You stop trying to prove strength. You demonstrate composure. This is identity consolidation. You no longer perform emotional controlled. You are emotionally controlled. You no longer try to appear grounded. You are grounded. You no longer seek stability. You embody it. People often mistake this state for coldness. It is not cold, it is disciplined warmth. You still care. You still feel. But your feelings no longer command your behavior. You choose how much of yourself enters any moment. This makes you selective. Selection is power. You conserve energy. You preserve focus. You protect dignity. Over time, this becomes your natural posture. You walk slower. You speak less. You listen more. You respond thoughtfully. You do not rush to resolve discomfort. This shifts your entire presence. Others begin projecting strength onto you. They assume confidence. They sense depth. They feel stability. Not because you say anything, because you remain centered when they are not. Quiet mastery also changes your relationship with uncertainty. You stop fearing the unknown. You stop needing immediate answers. You stop forcing outcomes. You allow time to work. You trust process. This patience is rare. Most people need reassurance. You become comfortable without it. Most people need validation. You no longer depend on it. Most people need emotional feedback. You move forward without it. This independence becomes unmistakable. You become someone who does not chase, someone who does not cling, someone who does not emotionally negotiate. You move forward quietly, and in that quiet, power grows. Not explosive power, sustained power. The kind that cannot be taken away because it does not come from external approval. It comes from internal alignment. You understand that peace is not the absence of conflict. It is the ability to remain intact within it. You understand that strength is not emotional hardness. It is emotional regulation. You understand that control is not domination. It is self-command. And eventually, something profound settles in. You no longer measure yourself by how others react to you. You no longer shape yourself around perception. You no longer allow chaos to define your state. You simply remain steady, aware, detached. And when that happens, external pressure loses its grip, emotional noise fades into the background, and your presence becomes unshakable, because real power begins when nothing outside of you controls what happens inside of you.